Hey everyone, this is Tracy Friedlander. You're listening to Crushing Classical, redefining a thriving classical music career. Today on the show, I have Conrad Tao, pianist and composer. Conrad has been playing professionally as a soloist since he was 9 years old, which is amazing. But what I love is how in charge of his career he is. He doesn't follow the typical rules of what a piano soloist usually looks like. We talk about how he was able to maintain creative control of his career while essentially being raised as a professional from an early age. Conrad performs music and collaborates with musicians he wants to, composes music for himself as well as playing new music and standard repertoire. He's 100% the boss of his career. We discuss how he stayed true to himself as he matured and how he continues to do so as his career evolves, what it was like to start at so young, and his pointed advice and point of view on the future of classical music. But before we start, a couple of things. First, I've started a mailing list to keep you informed of new episode launches and other Crushing Classical news. As your gift for signing up, you'll get a free PDF download, 3 ways becoming visible can revolutionize your music career. Thank you in advance. The link to sign up is in the show notes. I'd also like to thank Fix Music for sponsoring Crushing Classical. Fix has been my sponsor since the beginning of the podcast, and their business continues to grow and provide even more value. They now offer business accounts for choruses, orchestras, libraries, churches, and universities. This includes volume discounts of up to 25%. Of course, they continue to offer free shipping on all domestic orders, and they've also partnered with FedEx to offer 2-day shipping at insanely low prices, even to Alaska and Hawaii. They continue to expand their catalog with everything from high-quality jazz method books to elegant hardcover or text editions and everything in between. They are happy to take suggestions and requests from their customers, so if there is something you need, reach out to them through their website at fixmusic.com. They'll be happy to get it for you. And as always, use the discount link in the show notes to receive 10% off your first order at Fix. Let's get started. So, welcome on the show. Thank you so much for coming, Conrad.
Thanks, Tracy.
I'm so glad. Right before I pressed record, you said where you're heading right after this recording or this evening. So,
I'm off to Lenox, Massachusetts. I'm off to Tanglewood tonight, and I'm making my debut with the Boston Symphony on Friday.
Oh my gosh, that's so exciting!
Yeah, it's been a summer of debuts actually.
Really?
I made my playing debut also with New York and Cleveland this summer as well.
Oh wow!
The
big five.
Yeah, well, it ended up being just a kind of by happenstance. Everything happened within like a 2-month period.
That's really exciting. So you've been performing for a really long time. I knew you were a child prodigy, but I read up a little bit on you this week, and I was blown away by how long you've been playing.
Yeah, I've been doing it for over half my life at this point.
Wow. Like performing professionally.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I've been playing been playing music and playing the instrument for my whole life at this point, pretty much.
Yeah.
Just like I started from the beginning. But yeah, I've been doing the professional thing. It's had that flavor for solid 13 years or so.
Wow, that's amazing. That's really amazing. And what I love about your career is that you've really managed to create a unique career, like completely to yourself, as opposed to, the typical kind of standard, maybe traditional historical soloist. You're a composer as well. So I just think that's so amazing. I would think that would be hard to do as someone who started from a really young age, because when you're little, aren't people really trying to mold you and make you, isn't that generally the thing that happens? Like people around you, because you're a kid, they're trying to tell you where to go and what to do, right?
Well, yes, to an extent, and I don't know how I absorbed this exactly. I think it was A big part of it was my parents, but um, I think one of the weirder things about starting really young and having that some modicum of like public attention like that on you when you're young is that it's not really about you ever. And now I actually think that that's one of the lovely things about music making is that when you're interacting with folks afterwards, when you're hearing about how people responded to what you're doing, if you're interested in hearing that, you can sort of embrace the fact that it's not about you, because it's much more about an audience sharing parts of themselves. But I think when you're like 11 or 12 or 13, for me it was helpful to know it wasn't about me pretty early on.
Yeah, like you, that's really amazing that you even know that
Well,
now.
see, that's the thing. I mean, I'm not sure how that was imparted.
Yeah.
I mean, honestly, maybe it was just something I learned quickly as a defense mechanism. But I think I'm glad I realized that the way people talk about prodigy types, if that's the archetype you're in, like it's weird. It can get weird.
I bet.
It can get a little bit weird, and everyone wants to feel like they're touching God. I think like it can get it starts to become a projection thing.
Okay.
But that's okay, and I'm grateful that I feel like I recognized that early on.
Yeah, well, was it?
I never felt too much like I was being molded or shaped. I feel very lucky that I was around people who primarily thought the important thing was the long term.
Wow.
Like trying to make sure that I was happy enough doing it that I would actually,
Keep
be
doing
able
it.
to continue
Yeah.
doing it if that was actually the thing that ended up happening, like if I wanted to continue doing it.
Right.
And that helped enormously. And the fact that I never had like an insanely massive spike in attention. It was more just a gradual build and just a more like I felt able ultimately to do it kind of on my terms.
That's awesome. Because, I mean, I wonder, was there sort of a process there where you realized it wasn't about you? Because I think a lot of classical musicians, including myself, like you start to think, oh, if things are on an up and then a down, like if that happens, you make it about yourself. So maybe it's about the
Sure.
audience, maybe it's about just auditioning or things like that. Like, had you always had that? I mean, it would be amazing if you had like that kind of ability to zoom out and say, this isn't about me. This is about them. This is about the audience and their perceptions and everything. Like, how did you come to that?
Well, it's a slow process. I mean, I think it's a lot easier said than done.
Right.
Like it's a lot easier to think that and to intellectualize that and rationalize that than to actually feel that deep
Yeah.
down.
Yeah.
But it happened in waves. I think I think it was just I think it was necessary for my sanity, honestly, because
Right.
otherwise you're getting a really bizarre kind of validation, uh, like a very intense but very short and ephemeral kind of validation. Uh, if it's all about you, that it's a very weird source of support.
Right.
And when I viewed it more as like people are sharing parts of themselves with me, then that kind of interaction became a lot more fun and a lot more
Yeah.
open and a lot more like something I could participate in. Uh, I don't know. it just seemed clear. Again, I feel as though, honestly, for me, it's a little bit like it's my way of coping with it. I
But it's
don't
such a
really,
healthy way of coping, like
maybe,
really.
I definitely don't want to say like this is how it is. I mean, I think
Yeah.
it's, obviously people come to these things differently, and it's still always a process.
Yeah.
But for me, it's a way of, at least now, it's a way of being able to engage honestly with people, with audiences, but also, recognizing that it's not a referendum on me. It's best when it's a conversation. Um, I it's hard to say. I like to give my parents a lot of credit. They like to give me a lot of credit. My mom likes to tell a story about when my family was still in Illinois. I think I was maybe 6 years old, and I did like a local news segment, as prodigies are wont to do. And I think she says someone approached me and her in a supermarket, and it wanted to have a conversation, and she says I just walked away. She
How
says
old are you?
I must have still been like 6 or 7 or something.
Right.
She says I just walked away. So I don't know. I don't recall that, obviously, but I I don't know. I think I was also lucky that I felt pretty supported at the end of the day by like my support system. Like I had my supportive family. I had teachers who were like rigorous, but also like definitely made it fun. So I think I've in retrospect, I also had a pretty normal childhood. It didn't feel that defined by the music making. That kind of happened a little later. So I think that's also an element, perhaps.
Yeah, well, you lived in Illinois. You lived in Urbana.
I was born in Urbana, and when I was 5 years old, we moved a little bit closer to Chicago. So yeah, Illinois is my first music scene.
That's great. That's where I'm
Yeah.
from. So just out of curiosity, near Chicago was it?
So I lived, after we moved from Champaign-Urbana, we moved up to Naperville.
Oh my God.
Yeah.
That's so close to where I grew up. I'm not kidding. My aunt lives there right now.
Yeah, I'm grateful that I had a few years there.
Yeah. It's a nice
I
suburb.
I like variously claiming like the Midwest and New York as like places of origin, like
Yeah.
whatever is convenient. And genuinely like to have some real lived like imprinted experience of suburbia,
Oh, yeah.
and like kind of rural suburbia as well, being from Urbana.
Yeah.
And then like obviously like an extremely urban environment. I feel now looking back, having some friends who were born and raised in New York, I'm just like, there are certain things about American day-to-day life that you don't quite grasp. Like there are just certain rituals of like suburban life that I do now feel quite grateful.
Like what?
I don't know. I think just like the laziness and boredom
Yeah.
of like summer vacation in the suburbs.
Oh, right. Like
Totally
there's
something.
nothing to do and no plans made for you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so you're just hanging out, and you're just, you're sometimes watching TV, but honestly, what I remember more is you're just like, you're desperate to do something. So you just meet up with people or hang out, or like, I rode my bike the most during those years.
Yeah.
And I also like, it's, now living in an urban environment and everything, I just feel kind of grateful for understanding like a life in which your notion of going out to eat was like going out to the Chinese buffet, or like TGI Fridays,
Yeah.
or
Right.
Ruby Tuesdays if you were feeling fancy. There's something there. There's something.
You think there's something down to earth about it?
I don't know. I don't want to fetishize it, and I don't want to like. I think it's more just like it's something that I remember, and something that I can recognize in different people's life experience, and like
Yeah.
I just I value it. And I value just having that familiarity, like walking around town to the library. Like it's just there's a kind of casualness to those years that I appreciate a lot.
I love that. It makes it sound way more romantic when you talk about it too,
I
honestly.
mean, yes, the luxury of like being away from it for a long time and then looking back at it. Of course, it's like a narrativized thing, and also
Right.
like it was I was there from ages 5 to 9, so I have a very specific like lens of remembering
Right.
it. Yeah,
Exactly. I know, but I know the area, and when you say that thing about going out, it's so funny because where I lived was west of Naperville, like 25 minutes, and like there was one restaurant that we
yeah,
went to.
right,
It was
yeah,
like, oh my gosh, it's so funny. And now you live in New York, which is like essentially the epitome of where you could have like a European lifestyle, you go
right.
outside, there's something to do right next to the door you just walked out of. So,
Yeah, and I mean, I love it.
yeah.
I love being based here, but it's just
It's cool that you had that experience of growing up in different places, especially
yeah,
as a
and
musician. Because I mean, what about fostering your music education in that area as a
well, that was
kid?
another amazing thing like that. It was a really high quality music scene because the CSO was right there, and
Mm-hmm.
the Chicago Symphony was my like hometown orchestra,
Yep.
and there were just really good players everywhere, and yet it had the feeling of, I know Chicago's not a small town, but it had the feeling to me of like a pretty intimate small town music scene.
You know
It
what?
felt like
It
a
it
neighborhood
does.
music scene. It
Yeah.
was like, and I think a crucial part of it was that because I was there as a young kid, so I was like going to music school at the Music Institute of Chicago,
Mm-hmm.
and I was so that was in Winnetka, and then I was at doing chamber music at this program called Midwest Young Artists, and I think what was kind of crucial was that it, although like the level was really high, I never got the sense that these music schools for kids were at all like pre-professional,
Mm.
like at all. It never, like at that time in my life, you just did it because it was something in your life, and maybe it was fun. It was like community music school feeling to me. But the quality was, totally super high. But like, it wasn't an expectation that if you were a student there, you really wanted to do this for the rest of your life necessarily. It was just like, yeah, it's just something that you're doing. I really, really, really value that
I think you need to write a
because
book about how to handle your prodigy if you have one. You know what I mean? Like everything you're describing is so super healthy. It sounds really, really good. I mean, I'm sure that parents of prodigies struggle to know what to do.
yeah, I mean, my parents describe it sometimes now as like really just hoping that they weren't making bad decisions.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and you don't, I, there's no, there's no right way to do it. I think that the what I would always say is something that really doesn't only apply to kids with like unusual lives or whatever. It's just more general. It's just like your kids aren't an extension of you.
Mm-hmm.
Your kids are people, and you just sort of listen to what they're doing, and you try to, and I mean, this is even my experience with what little teaching I've done, where I've come to realize like, um, working with students is much more about listening to them, and listening to the ideas that they have and trying to facilitate those while anticipating the roadblocks that they'll come up against, and trying to give them tools, and trying to give them tools to break down those roadblocks, and then also when you can, trying to like move those roadblocks out of the way before they notice.
That's a really great way of describing it. Did when you were a student, was that when you started composing as well? When you were young, really young, or like when did you start doing that?
I started composing in some capacity. Like I started trying to teach myself how to compose shortly after I started learning to read music, and sort of like trying to figure out the grammar from the other side. And so I have these old sketchbooks from when I was 3, and I think it's like 3 stabs a page or something, and it's just like enormous, messy handwriting, trying to figure out how music notation works and getting everything wrong. And so I think when I started like learning, I mean, I think according to my parents, the first tunes I played at the instrument were like nursery tunes. So the next step, I think, was like, okay, if these chains of notes create something like a melody, right? I don't think I had the word for melody,
Right.
but like if that strings together into something, why is that? How can I make my own melody? Like, I think that was like the next step. I think the first thing I ever called a finished piece was like a melody that I played on the violin and called it like Congratulations. And then I started studying composition more formally when I was 5. I started studying like music theory, and yeah, and then from there it got like more intentional and more about like actually learning how scoring works and what you can do with notation. And then it developed out of that.
That's so great. It seems so natural, you know?
I look back at it now from like and I realize how little time it was, but it did feel completely natural. It did feel totally logical. I mean, I think one of the great gifts of my experience starting young was that it all was just like, why wouldn't I do it? Why wouldn't I
Right?
do it? It's like, it's a thing that made me happy. It was a thing that I was like, that definitely satisfied, constantly. It satisfied, but also like awakened new curiosities. So like, why wouldn't I do it? If it was fun, why wouldn't I do it? And I'm very grateful that was sort of the central thing that it like surrounded in the early years.
That's so great. So, with that much success, like so early on, I mean, was it ever, did you ever have to deal with like thinking, all right, I've arrived. I'm here. I'm doing it. Like as a student, I mean, you're a student, but you're also in a career like right away.
No, if anything, I felt self-conscious about it.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, because I'm still another person. I'm like, that's the thing I've never liked about the professionalization aspect of it. And this is why, like, as I've gotten older, I felt more and more just happier, especially like among musicians. Like, I don't want to stand out. Like, I wanted to be with my friends, and I wanted to just, feel like I was having a good time. And I was worried that it would isolate me. It didn't actually. It didn't feel like it isolated me, looking back, really, from like my peers at Juilliard. But no, I tried not to talk about it. And that, if anything, that is like the one little kernel of like the one aspect of starting young that really has like stayed on as like an annoying voice in my head, is like maybe a little bit of a messy relationship with like not wanting to talk about it too much, and not wanting to feel like it was defining me in the way that someone saw me. Like, I think that, if any, that is maybe became a bit of a source of like stress.
Not wanting to talk about like that you started so young, or not wanting.
Yeah, just not wanting to draw attention to that side of my life, which was hard because it was a big part of my life.
Right. Yeah. And people are kind of obsessed with it, right?
Yeah, I mean, the flip side to everything we were talking about earlier about like audiences, they're not they're not talking about you. They're not responding to you. Like, I think what I'm talking about now, I was also at a time in my life where I wanted people to recognize me as me. I wanted people to connect with me as me. I wanted to feel like I could connect with people as me. And I think I was worried, and I think it's still a challenge sometimes. I was worried that like my weird, slightly kind of unusual life experience was going to like be a roadblock to that. And you know, I'm still figuring out how to, you know, navigate that and to try to not have too many like pre-expectations about how someone is seeing me or interpreting the experiences I've had. But I don't know. So I think that I don't think I ever had a moment where I felt like I've made it. I don't know if that's in my personality. And I certainly not when I was a student. It was more like I have to stay like a real person and like I really do hate the word, but like I think at the time it was definitely like I have to stay normal.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, I like that. It's interesting. It's so interesting to hear how you describe it, because being a musician is so much of your identity. Just, I think everybody's who's a musician, especially classical, because you start at such a young age, you know?
Yeah. And it's also like genuinely it is something that means like if you really continue doing it like deeper into your life, like it is something that speaks to the entire world.
Right.
Like music making is about life, and it's an extraordinary thing that we get to have that in our lives. So I feel like I had to really come back to a place where I had faith in that, where that music making was this incredible, honest, or could be this like incredible, intimate, honest exchange between people. So yeah, it's a huge part of your life. And now now I'm like, yes, it is of course a huge part of my life, and I'm so proud of it and I'm so happy about it. But music making and the prodigy thing and the professional success, all of those I think are quite distinct. You know, like the joy of music making is not for me the same as like it is. I have to constantly tell myself like the professionalization is something that you're lucky enough to have as like an apparatus that you can use to do the thing, but the career is an excuse for you to make music. Like it's not. And I mean, I know I speak from a really fortunate position because I sort of I don't know if this is quite the right way to describe it, but I sometimes feel like I fell into the career side of it because I started doing the professional version of music making pretty early on, and I managed to just kind of keep doing it. But I have found it extremely like centering to remind myself like it's, you know, you can get good at the professional side of things. You can be good at your job. You can learn to be professional because you should learn to be professional. Because you should treat people with respect, and you should also understand what people expect of you. And like, it's just, you know, you do your part to not make things more difficult and to facilitate the real thing, which is the music making. But like, I have found it necessary to distinguish a little bit between those sides of it. And so the prodigy aspect of it, the early performance aspect of it, I think, again, I don't know why, and I don't know if it was right. I can't really make that judgment easily, but I just sort of felt like this doesn't, in the long term, this doesn't really mean very much.
Right. It just matters what you're doing now.
Yeah.
You know, and I think the way that you've navigated as a as a pianist and now also a composer, playing your own music, and but you still play Bach and you still play the standard repertoire. So I
Yeah,
wonder
it's
about
like why
that. Like,
choose?
right. And do you think that people feel pressure, soloists and regular, orchestral musicians, I think, sometimes feel pressure, or they feel like they have to say, I do new music. That's all I do, or
I don't think
whatever.
you have to choose. I have an uneasy relationship to like specialization. I think like, I mean, I am specialized in the sense that I'm a musician,
Right.
but within the field, I have an uneasy relationship to this idea that like you have to choose one, you have to focus everything on one avenue. Um, I I never really, well, no, I shouldn't say I never felt like I had to choose. I was worried I would have to choose. I was worried that I would have to choose between all of the different things I wanted to do. I was worried that I would have to eventually like capitulate to what the market said was like good repertoire, which I mean, in retrospect, was an absurd thing. There's what market? It's like we don't have enough of a market to even have that conversation of what that
Right.
could possibly mean. Um, it's just not. It's like irrelevant as a framework, and but that was a thought that I had, that I would like have to survey the landscape and be like, okay, what are people buying right now? You know, like what pieces should I put on my rep list or whatever? And it's
Right.
just like so that was something I was worried about having to do. I was worried about having to pick between piano and composition. I was worried about um I didn't, you know, I think it's still like I'm too easily bored, so I think to an extent I am destined to be a dilettante in some ways for the rest of my life. And but like I also didn't want to feel like I was infringing on like a new music territory that I didn't have any right to be in. That was something that brought me anxiety for a little while.
Yeah, I think a
Because
lot of people feel like that.
yeah, I felt a little bit like I'm like, oh, well, especially for me, because I was like, I have been doing like, not only am I so much from traditional concert world, but I did the prodigy thing. Like
Right.
I'm like I have no. I was like really envious of people who came to it a little later in their life for a while, um, because I thought maybe correctly, maybe not, but I felt like sometimes composers who came to composition later in their lives, like in undergrad or even in grad school, um, I thought they had like a totally like much more admirable clarity of purpose in what they were doing. So I had a lot of, you know, internal ruminating on like how I was, what I was able to do. Like a lot, there was definitely like concern. Um, the I don't even, it wasn't a single change, it was a gradual change, but I think I've started to realize like, well, if clearly this matters to me because it's like weighing on me, like clearly it matters to me um to build a career in which I'm not just playing old music all the time, and certainly not just playing old music like kind of reiterating the same narratives or mythologies of that old music all the time. So clearly that's important because I'm constantly thinking about it. So I started just trying to be a little. I decided like, well, then I have to be impulsive. I just have to. I have to be impulsive because otherwise I'm going to constantly be worrying about how it'll be interpreted, and that doesn't do anyone any good. So I started just putting programs together pretty intuitively and just saying like, this is what I'm going to do for my recital, and you know, you just set that, and then you're like, okay, now I'm doing it. That was really the way that I tried to figure out my own rhythm.
Okay.
um
That's awesome.
and
You just do it.
yeah,
Essentially, you just
yeah,
do it
right,
and you navigate it and you see how that feels and you change it based on how that felt.
yeah, you do it and you try to learn from it.
Right.
And you try to embrace the fact that it's scary. In fact, I think I very slowly like piecemeal, and I think I'm still learning this all the time. You learn that embracing the fear and embracing the embarrassment of like doing a project that you thought about, that you care about, like it's deep, it's very vulnerable to say like, this is what I think, this is what I believe, this is what I care about. But that taking that leap actually it ultimately feels deeply rewarding, and it opens up this possibility of, I think, a really a deeper communication with people potentially, and basically I guess that it feels worth it, and feels rewarding in a way that's not easy to quantify, which has been a lovely realization, because it's a really nice, mysterious feeling.
That's so great. And I feel like this really ties into something else I wanted to talk to you about that we talked about before, which is, the approach of programming by orchestras, and how there's a lot of fear around programming what people want, what musicians want, or just in general, what will sell. I think they worry about that, And we had talked about like dumbing down classical, and, putting Star Wars on 2 times a year on every season, things like that, the safe stuff that they know will sell. And it sounds very opposite of what you're saying right now. You're not.
Well, I mean, yeah, the orchestral ecosystem is its own animal, and I don't claim to understand how hard it is to figure out that budget every year. I can only imagine. But like, so I speak from a different perspective. I'm not an administrator, and I have no interest in being one.
Right. But I wonder what they could take from what you just said, as far as, even if it was just some tidbit of what you had just said, to kind of foster a new feeling about it.
Well, mostly I feel like if you're making all your decisions based on what you think will sell, that means you're completely capitulating to the status quo, pretty much. And I think most importantly, misunderstanding who has some ability to set or influence the terms of the status quo.
Right.
Like, whose responsibility is it to shift the status quo? Sometimes I feel like this whole thing of like, oh, this, we're just programming what'll sell, like, kind of just becomes a convenient excuse to like hide behind your own conservatism. And it's like, whatever, it's just kind of boring at a certain point. And then more broadly, like the whole thing about how do we sell more tickets? How do we get younger audiences? How do we get more audiences? I don't know. I often think, like, I've been saying this for years. I've been saying this since like 2013 at least. Like, you don't treat people like big demographic blocks. Like that I think is like a fatal mistake, and certainly one influenced by like completely mindless like market research type thinking.
Yeah.
It's like, you don't. No. You don't get to. You can't treat people like flat demographic blocks. Also, the whole thing about like, oh, how do we get more young audiences? As though young audiences were like an sort of completely immovable block of people. As though we've actually earned that audience.
Right.
It's just like, I'm like, what there's this weird arrogance in it where it's just like, we must be entitled to an audience at all times of a certain size, because if we don't, we won't serve. Something about it feels deeply wrong to me. I also feel like there is the other aspect of it, which is that like the people who tend to design these campaigns tend to not really know what young people tend to not be that connected to young people. And I have no answer for how to fix that or anything like that. But it's just like, I don't know. It seems like the wrong question to me, because there are young people in classical music. Like, hello, I'm here. My friends are here.
Right.
I also, And then when I really get deep into it, I'm just like, the audience, there is an audience that's already there.
Yeah.
Like, you should play for them. Like, it's just strange. This whole what I hear in that question is this anxiety where it's just like, we have to replenish our audience supply. And I'm just like, the mistake is treating people that way or thinking of people that way. Like it's the mistake is thinking of people or audiences as like a pipeline. And it's like, no. It's like, you have to actually do the work of like engaging with people.
Yes.
It's a much more complicated thing, but like the complexity is a lot more worthwhile, I suspect, than trying to find the initiative that that you think is, I don't know, safe or easy or doesn't demand you actually have any point of view.
Mm-hmm. This is an overriding philosophy here. I feel, your idea about that it's not about you generally. Like you said that at the very beginning, you said that at the beginning that it wasn't about you, that the whole thing was about the audience experience, and
the
music,
same thing
applies, and the music, and the same thing applies to this conversation we're having right now. So that's so interesting, and it's so true. It's about the music and the experience.
Because I have the music, I know I have something that is about me, right? Like the sort of flip side to this that we haven't talked about is like, it is also like incredibly deeply, it is about you.
Right.
But it's about you with other people. It's about like, I mean, it's one of the great joys of being a musician in any kind of classical tradition. I happen to work in this one, but like the fact that if you're in a classical tradition and you're playing music that's been documented previously, it's an amazing thing that you can find yourself through that, and then also like connect super deeply with people that you will never meet because they're dead. Right? It's a weird thing that through Mozart or Beethoven and Schubert, like, these old stalwarts, you can find parts of yourself in there. And you are also like, and that is often a very solitary process, and it is often something found in alone time, but it is a kind of alone time. It's like, it's like reading. How is it possible that this kind of solitary experience is also something that makes you feel so deeply connected with humanity? So that is what it's about. That is what it's about. And all of the other extensions of that, all of the social extensions of it, like music making is ultimately a social thing. It's like social on stage if you're playing chamber music with other people. I really do believe that there is a way in which it can be social even with an audience. It may be a slightly more mysterious kind of sociality, but like, it's about people. It's about the music, like, but it's not. It's not about proving yourself, or like, it's not about declaring your supremacy at all. Like, I really deeply believe that. I think that music making can be the opposite of that. I think music making can be a place in which we can really try to let go of the desire to prove supremacy, where that desire can maybe dissipate or move into other zones, and like maybe that need can be fulfilled in other ways. Maybe whatever need to be recognized and heard that drives the impulse, or lets the impulse to exert your power over someone else in a destructive way. Like maybe that impulse can be. Maybe music making offers a different way of thinking about it. I don't know. So I guess I'm sorry. I feel like I've drifted away a little bit, but that is the philosophy. That is like that is the extension of the philosophy. It's like, it's not about you. It's about
Right.
but it is. It's just, it's not about you in this protective sense. It's not about you constantly like having to look behind your shoulder because someone is going to like try to take advantage. You know, it's a way out of that thinking.
Absolutely. No, I like how it came together. Even though you did, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. It really does. So, tell me, who in the classical world is inspiring you right now?
Mm, that's always a fun question. The last couple of years, I've been extremely inspired by people like Patricia Kopachinskaya and Barbara Hannigan,
Oh yeah.
who are both like extraordinarily great musicians who clearly have both like seemingly endless curiosity and really idiosyncratically personal points of view. And it's just really, it's wonderful to see that those things can not only coexist but in fact like so deeply feed one another. So that has been endlessly inspiring. I have also been really just enjoying listening to like recent Argerich and Sokolov performances, just because these are people who've been playing for decades and you can hear it in the best possible way. I really, it's definitely one of the gifts of being a musician is that it's something that you can hold on to for the rest of your life. Maybe piano is one of the easier instruments also to keep around from a physical standpoint. And I don't know, you listen to like an Argerich performance from 2010 compared to like a performance of the same piece in like 1970, and it's a world of difference. And that's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing that your growth and shifting and changing as a person can be almost tracked through your playing. And sometimes the most inspiring thing is people who seem to have reached a point where they play from such a place of authority that they can also just like be completely vulnerable.
That's amazing.
That is endlessly inspiring.
Honestly, I don't know who those people are.
Oh, Martha Argerich and Grigory Sokolov, both pianists.
Okay.
And both have had careers for a very, very long time. And I think are at the absolute top of their are playing at their absolute most interesting like now. And I don't think that's always the case, but it is the case often enough that I'm really, it makes me excited. It's just like, oh yeah, it's just at a certain point you realize it's just like, oh, you just continue doing it and you just continue living your life, and whatever happens is worth pursuing. It's just like really at a certain point the only imperative is like be honest with yourself and be honest in your exploration of your own music making, and that and that's irreplaceable.
I love that. Wow, that's awesome. I'm gonna have to look these people up.
Definitely.
Yeah, and I'll include links, to their information in the show notes, because those spellings are a little bit, I'm sure,
Sure.
hard to figure out. So I'll get those from you.
Also, I mean, before I forget, I
Yeah.
should say like the other classical musicians I'm endlessly inspired by are like people of my generation. So many people who are so just fabulously talented and curious and open. My trio mates, Stefan Jakiv and Jay Campbell, and Stefan's like one of the most poetic and expressive violinists I've ever heard, and Jay is definitely a comrade in terms of really believing in new music, having a notion of music making that really like exceeds any boundaries that we think of as like fixed. And then there are musicians like Alexei Kenny, who's a violinist, I think a couple years younger than me, just extraordinary. And yeah, it's a wonderful time. And then that's just classical musicians, quote unquote.
Right.
But like also then there's the improviser community, which has also been endlessly inspiring to me. Working with people like Taishan Sori, who I played a show with in 2016 that really kind of changed my life. And then my collaborator Charmaine Lee, who's a experimental vocalist, improviser, and just does so many amazing things with music that blow my mind open with possibilities all the time. So I'm extremely fortunate in the last few years to have found and endlessly inspiring people that I get to actually like bounce stuff off of pretty frequently.
That's so great. Oh my gosh, I want to get all those names from you.
Yeah, I will put them down in text.
Okay, cool. And then what do you have? I know you mentioned your debuts that you've done and what you have coming up tonight. What else do you have coming up this season?
This season I have a bunch of things coming up. I have a new album coming out.
Oh, wow, great.
In October, I hope. Stuff hasn't been completely announced, but I have a new album of music by Zhevsky, Copeland, and Julia Wolf called American Rage. That'll be coming out in the fall.
Oh, that's great.
And I've got recitals. I'm playing at Carnegie. I'm playing in Weil Hall in November with a really expansive program with music by David Lang, Bach, Elliott Carter, Julia Wolf, Rachmaninoff, Jason Eckert, and Schumann. So typically eclectic, I suppose.
You've got a lot on your plate too. Wow.
I've always got a lot on my plate. I'm writing stuff, and I'm playing a piano and electronics show at an experimental music festival up in Utrecht in the Netherlands.
Oh wow, that's so great. I saw something on YouTube where you were playing. Was it on YouTube? It was a piece for piano and iPad.
Oh,
it sounded
yeah.
really cool.
Oh, thank you. That was sort of that was from 2013, which was like that was my initial like this is what I want my career to look like year, which was a mixed bag, but it's pretty fabulous. I'm excited about everything that's coming up.
That's so great. Okay, well,
yeah.
I'll make sure all this information is in the show notes for everybody. So if they're in New York, they can catch your performance or be in the know about your CD release, your recording release.
Absolutely.
Do you say CD anymore? I mean, people don't buy CDs.
I just say album. I mean, look,
right.
I have some CDs, but I've definitely grown up much more in the like post iTunes downloading generation, and we'll see where that takes us, right?
Exactly. Well, it's so exciting. Thank you so much for being on today, Conrad. This has been a great conversation.
Thank you, Tracy.
I'm Tracy Friedlander, and you've been listening to Crushing Classical Podcast. You can follow Crushing Classical on Instagram and Facebook at Crushing Classical. If you haven't yet, you can go to Apple Podcasts and subscribe, rate, and review. Your review helps others to find these conversations. Thank you so much for listening.